episode of beginning of the week, and happy to meet you again and happy week. So I will be talking today about one specific topic that we're discussing with one of my clients, and that was also my experience from the past about how we're afraid of a confrontation or a conflict, right? So I really wanted to bring to your awareness, and I think I have spoken about this in different ways, but I really dialed it down today to talk about my experience of how it affects, and then also show you how my client was doing, and then how we can change it if the results we don't like, right? So when we say that, let's say we have a confrontation, or we're afraid of confrontation or conflict with specific person at work, and we say that, oh my God, I don't want to have conflict, it's not worth it, or it's going to be too much of an effort, it takes a lot of my energy, and therefore we decide that we are not wanting to have that conflict and we are afraid of them. And then what oftentimes happens is, this was my experience, right? I was trying to avoid that person, and it's like immediately when I say, oh, I'm afraid of conflict, it felt like as if I'm afraid of that person, and then therefore I would avoid that person. I would be super careful when I write emails to that person. I would be like vigilant all the time, and then if that person is in the room or if we need to do something together, then I would make sure to explain, in whatever ways possible. And I would try to engage that person as much as possible beyond even what was maybe needed, because of my fear of I'm afraid of having that conflict with that person, right? And then I would try to basically solve it, in quotes, in so many different ways, but out of fear, and that would never be a solution that I like. And therefore, I would I think the way that my client was also telling me is that she would overly engage that person, even though she doesn't think that that would be necessary, or that's she would have done it otherwise if she wasn't afraid of that confrontation with that person. And I can so relate to that. And I think I was also in that space of wanting to basically um, be patient about everything that person was doing, even though maybe I shouldn't have been patient and I should have been setting more boundaries, but I wasn't, because again, I thought that me setting boundary would create conflict that I'm afraid of, right? So therefore, the result that I was creating for myself in the end is that I was creating the conflict within myself, meaning the conflict of, oh my God, if this person, if I'm going to write this email this way, this person will perceive it this way. If I write it this way, she may or he may receive it or perceive it this way. Therefore, I better think about so many different ways of how to say it. So that would always be like a conflicting feeling within me all the time, right? And whenever I'm thinking about that person. The other result would be that I didn't really want to be in the same room with that person, or I wouldn't really want to be dealing with that person. So therefore, going to work would become like, even though I'm looking for forward to other things at work, thinking about that person would feel like, then I don't really want to do that, I don't really want to go there, right? So therefore, I would worry about how that person will be perceiving it, how a person will be thinking about this, or what another thing that person may come up that will make my day again not really enjoyable, right? And I would because of that thinking of, I'm afraid to have a conflict or confrontation, I would actually like keep collecting all the feelings of resentment, all the feelings of this shouldn't be happening, but it is happening, but I don't want to go through this, and therefore I would create a lot of this conflict within myself, and the worry and overthinking about that, right? And then I would basically come to a point where I can't tolerate that anymore. I can't tolerate that behavior, or I don't want to tolerate that behavior or be patient with that behavior. And therefore, um, conflict may have erupted eventually because of, okay, that's enough. I have done all the things that I could. I have engaged that person in the best possible ways I could. And if that person can't see this of all the things that I'm doing, right, this is where resentment starts happening. Therefore, I may as well, kind of thing. And then it will like explode eventually anyway. And then all the things that I have been avoiding and avoiding, that all like bottled up to a point where then conflict becomes uh, like the next thing inevitable somehow, right? So you can see that when I see about like when I think about my own experience of the past when this was happening, this is what I was doing is I was telling myself I'm afraid of conflict, and this client of mine who's also thinking that, oh, I'm afraid of the conflict, and then seeing all the effects of that type of thinking and how much that affects our current like ordinary normal everyday lives. How are we behaving in the way that maybe we don't want to behave, but we keep doing it, hoping to resolve the conflict in quotes, right? Whatever the thing that we're afraid of, hoping to resolve it without going there. But then the solution always coming from this place of, oh, let me avoid going to the conflict, so therefore let me try other ways, and then feeling like we can't really find other ways. So when we see this, the result that I want to show you, like bring your awareness to, is that the result of creating conflict within ourselves all the time, right? Which again, where all of our energy goes to, and that's not where we want to spend our energy. B, we're not really solving the conflict or avoiding conflict by trying to solve it out of fear. Out of fear, we never seem to solve things well. So that's why the situation is not solved, simply because we keep avoiding and tiptoeing around, which is not going to solve anything, right? And C, we are also letting the other person confirm their own expectation or their own judgments of, well, I was right about her. She was like, for instance, if the origin of the conversation was that she doesn't involve me in certain decision making, for instance, right? Like it was in the case of my client, and my client was saying that, well, it's not her really level to be discussing this type of decisions. There are other decisions that we can discuss at her level, but this is the decision that needed to be made in a different type of circle. And therefore, now that if she makes an exception and invites the other person to this discussion, while she's not engaging other people of her level to this discussion, then it will create unfairness, right? It creates this feeling of, from the other person's perspective of like, well, you see, I got what I came for, or I got what I wanted because I was right about her not involving me before, and now she's engaging me. But that's maybe not the the message that we would have sent if we weren't afraid of making decisions, or if we weren't afraid of having the conversation with the other person without being afraid of the confrontation. You see what I'm saying? Is like we create inequalities in the relationship with the other person because of this. I'm afraid of conflict and confrontation, and therefore we're not really speaking to that other person as equals with trust of how we're performing, how we're doing our job, and how they're doing their job, and what are the things that we need to solve. And there may be certain things that we cannot really do the way that the other person wants because of certain reasons, right? So therefore, we would have a very different conversation probably with the other person. And in order to illustrate this even further, the analogy that I want to bring you is the analogy that I thought of at, like, I had in my own life at some point in the past, like a very long past now. But anyway, the analogy was that I was in a relationship with someone where in a love relationship, right? And then I had this fear of him leaving me, like him quitting the relationship and leaving me, and therefore me afraid of that, uh, afraid of him leaving me, basically, and therefore me trying to do everything so that I can be liked, so that I can uh, have him convinced that he doesn't need to leave me, and doing lots of different crazy things around it, right? So therefore, the way that I'm thinking about whenever we think I'm afraid of this confrontation or conflict, I feel like a lot of the behavior that we come up with or that we go into are similar to the behavior that I'm describing when, in the analogy of, I hope he doesn't leave me, right? I am afraid of him leaving me and I hope he doesn't. And therefore, we try to start behaving, adjusting our behavior in the way that is not the way we want to, in the way that's resentful, in the way that we keep avoiding or we keep behaving weirdly that we otherwise wouldn't have if that fear wasn't there, or if we didn't think I'm afraid of confrontation or I'm afraid of him leaving or whatever it is. To see the thing that I'm like describing how that plays out. So now, when I say this, many of you may think, "Oh, well, Sal, are you suggesting that we all have conflicts and just have horrible lives at work?" Of course not. And if you know me, you know that I am a very peaceful person, a harmonious seeking person, sometimes maybe too much, which also can go against, right? But what I'm really suggesting is that the alternative is not that we go into conflict or we go into confrontation, and always have conflict or confrontation. The alternative is that I'm proposing is to think that in case that happens, in case the conflict happens, you know how to handle it. That's the alternative way I'm offering you to think about. Because what that does is, at least the way that I have employed in my life, I have applied in my life, right? The way that I have thought about it is that, okay, I do not want to be the person who avoids conflict. I also do not want to be the person who keeps having conflicts after conflicts or confrontation. That's not the purpose. But I want to be able to be handle a conflict in case that happens. And I don't want to be avoiding some discussions or some situations simply because I'm afraid of conflict, right? Because I know that whenever I avoid certain things that I actually should be looking at, then I create more damage to myself and possibly to the other person than actually sitting down with that person and having that conversation, even if I'm afraid that it will come to a conflict. But knowing that I may be able to handle a conflict or I may be able to go through it allows me to have that conversation instead of keep avoiding it like automatically, right? So do you see what I'm saying is that when I think that the conflict itself, what it is, in how it is that I'm afraid of and why, or whatever the thing that you want to explore around conflict and what you think about, and then how you are able to go through it in case it comes to that, in case that's the worst case scenario in your mind and you know how to handle, how to go through it, will automatically create this freedom for us within us to say, okay, I'm willing to go through and have this conversation. I'm willing to have this conversation that may feel like confrontational, that may feel like uncomfortable, but I'm willing to go through it and have it, because then we will clarify a lot of the things. We will then discuss what are the ways out in case the other person wants, right? And in case the other person does not, then at least we know that we're always available and ready to discuss it, but at the same time, not compromising our behavior and not adjusting or manipulating our behavior so that we avoid the conflict. See what I'm saying? So, whenever our thinking then is, I'm not afraid of conflict, or I'm um, willing to have this conversation, even if it comes to conflict, because it's important for me to clarify things, or because it's important that we have the clear air, whatever it is, right? Then we have more freedom and confidence within us to say, okay, how are we going to have this conversation that may feel uncomfortable? We're willing to have that uncomfortable feeling, but getting to the other side of resolving it from the place of not fear, but from the place of trust, from the place of wanting to solve this, then we have more freedom to do that. And then once we have that conversation, or once we clarify a lot of things, then it will not be nagging us in the back of our head. It will not be influencing our mornings the next day. It will not be creating conflict within us, because we have at least done our best to clarify. We have done our best to have that conversation. We have done our best to solve it in the best possible way. We didn't escape, we didn't avoid, but we were there. And therefore, we somehow let it go, even if it doesn't result in the things that we want to, but at least we have done our part, right? And then we don't need to create those worries or overthinking or those like nagging thoughts. We don't need to confirm our bias that we're afraid of conflict now, or we don't need to reinforce that fear, but we just go in our daily lives doing other things, then focusing on the things that we find important, and therefore we have done our part, not avoiding that thing. And if we look at the analogy that I was giving you before, where I was hoping, like from the love relationship that I had in the past, right? When I was hoping that he wouldn't leave me, the analogy, right? When I'm hoping that he wouldn't leave me, then I keep behaving in weird ways. But if I trust that if he does leave, then he leaves. I'm not afraid of that. Then I'm ready to have equal relationship with him. I'm ready to say the things that I want to say. I'm not afraid of having conflict, or I'm not afraid of having the confrontation, because I trust that he wants to be in this relationship. I trust that he wants to solve things the way that I want to. But if he doesn't, then I have at least done my part. And then if he leaves, then well, that's how it is. I don't want to be like with someone forcefully, obviously, right? I don't want to be with someone like keep trying to convince the other person to be with me, because that would be like a horrible relationship, and that would be a very unequal relationship. And therefore, I'm offering you to consider that as long as we are afraid of having conflicts or confrontations in our minds, then we're likely to keep creating unequal relationships that we don't like, relationships that we want to avoid all the time. And that's going to rob our joy of doing all the other things that we want in that environment. That's why I'm offering you to consider the alternative way of thinking of what if you are able to go through conflict, or what if you are able to have this conversation that where you don't allow it to come to a conflict, because you know how to go through this, how to allow all this uncomfortable feelings to be there, but still have the honest and frank solution oriented conversation, when the hope to get the results or outcomes that you want. What if you can trust yourself to be that person and work on that? That way, you're not like worried about what's going to happen after, how the other person is going to perceive, but rather, okay, let me go through this, let me have this conversation, let me uh, have my perspective, and then if the other person is not willing or not ready, then at least we have done our part, and we can focus on other things in the trust that the other person will come over and discuss eventually if the other person um, is ready, right? So that's the alternative way of thinking and behaving that I'm suggesting you to go for, or build your confidence around it. And if you want to work on this, come coach with me. I would love to help you get you to the place where you don't let your fear of conflict or confrontation destroy or influence your joy in working, influence your enjoyment of your working, and therefore you always know how to do and what to do in case that happens. And also trusting yourself that you will not let it be that far because you know how to handle conflicts or confrontations. So, my dears, have a beautiful week, and I will speak to you very soon. Thank you so much for your attention, and it was pleasure and honor to be doing this work with you and sharing my experience as well. Thank you. Have a great week.